So this is CNIT 125, Information Security Professional, and I have two announcements that may be of interest to you, which I wanted to make sure and include in the official lecture. The first one is Irvin found a program. There's already this program from somebody called Next Gen Cyber Talent that will give money to some City College students, but there's a new one from Microsoft. Microsoft has a cybersecurity scholarship program, and I'll put the link in the chat. It's also right on my page. And this requires you to prove that you have financial need. But if you do that, they will give you like $500 cash, and they will give you free Azure time and access to LinkedIn Premium, which includes Azure virtual machines and GitHub stuff, or GitHub education. I think a student developer pack at GitHub is the thing that includes some Azure time, and they will pay for certification exams up to $375, which might be interesting. For example, if you want to take the CISSP exam, it's very expensive. You might want to get whatever help you can paying for that if your boss is not paying for it. So anyway, check that out. That may be of interest to students. And here's another thing. The RSA conference is coming back to San Francisco, the biggest management-type security conference, probably primarily focused on people like CISSP candidates. It is not much technical hands-on. It's much more management and business, so much more appropriate to the students in this class. It's coming here, June 6 to June 9 in San Francisco. And as always, they have a college day when college students can get in some portion of it for free. But there's another deal, which I was only supposed to give to my official students, so I didn't put it right on my home page. I put it at the bottom of the 125 page. You can volunteer. There's an invitation down here. Let me get this page fitting on here better. Come on. There. All right. There it is, RSA 2022 volunteers. This takes you to a description of the thing. I'll put this in the chat. You have to be an official City College student, and you can then volunteer to be like a room host or something, and you get free admission to the whole conference that way. So you might want to check this out, some of these special deals. And of course, any of these conferences you might go to is all worth extra credit in any of my classes. So I just wanted to make sure, well, if you're not an official City College student, then I think none of this is available to you. I think all these things require being an official City College student. Sorry about that. It's a step forward, though, because most of these programs used to require that you were at a four-year college, and now they're letting two-year students in, so it's better. But still, yeah, you do have to be, I think, an official college student. And being at any college, though, would do for RSA. It doesn't have to be City College. But the rest of these, I think, are limited to City College, although you might read them and see. Yep, but that's a drag part of it, I understand. Anyway. So let's take a look at today's chapter. We finished the previous chapter, which is a little further than I thought we were going to get. So we're down to chapter 2, and it's not very long. So let's take a look at that. All right, so this is asset security. You can probably email the conference. Sure, this is right. By the way, that's important, social engineering. You could call and make your case. Maybe they'll give you a break, like especially the RSA one where you're volunteering. That might probably, I don't wonder, that's probably not limited to college students, I guess, now that I think about it. The person who sent it to me told me to give it to my students, but I think if you're not a student, I think you're volunteering, right? They'll probably take anybody for a volunteer. Yeah, try that and see. All right. I don't really like going to RSA very much because there's not much hands-on technical, which is what I like, but there absolutely is a whole lot of business and management. Anyway, and some students go there just to wander around the expo hall and get bags of swag. You can just get tons of gifts. Anyway, all right. So here's the topics here in asset security. Classifying data, understanding ownership, memory and remnants and data destruction, and then data security controls. Yeah, you get Fitbits, USB things, all sorts of little handouts. I know some people went there and got like drones or something, all sorts of things. All right, so you got to classify your data. If you're going to have you have data at different levels. There's some data that is public and you don't care. There's some data that is private and you have to care. So you have to store it in a more secure location and on more secure computers. And when you throw it away, you have to make sure it gets shredded or burned or something. So you have to label your data. In the government, you do confidential, secret, and top secret. And sensitive but unclassified is another level, or for official use only. These are levels used by government agencies. In the private sector, they use things like proprietary or internal use only. All right. So, and in national security environment, they have this stuff called sensitive compartmented information. You may remember it was a big deal when Donald Trump was president. A bunch of Congress people barged into the special room for the sensitive compartmented information, which was a huge violation of protocol. Yeah, and there's another good point. Don't trust a random. Barged into the skiff. And the skiff is supposed to be a sanitary place where you never bring in your phone or anything. And a bunch of people barged in with their phones. And this was considered a serious breach of protocol. Anyway, so this stuff is, you got compartmented information, which means you have to not only be cleared enough to see the stuff, which is usually top secret, if not always, you also have to have a documented need to know, and then you'll be allowed to go in and examine these documents. Anyway, so here's some examples of, I think, documents that were sensitive in this manner. All right, so clearance is determining whether you are cleared to see a certain level of information. This is based on a background check. The documented need to know comes from an agency determining what your area of knowledge is, what you typically like, what area of the world you cover. So if you're responsible for Europe, you will not be authorized to see what's happening in like Africa, that sort of thing. And that's called horizontal controls, because even if you're cleared to top secret, that doesn't mean you get access to all the top secret documents. You have the horizontal controls, which is you are authorized to see top secret documents, but you also must prove that you have need to know. So you would have to have some other documentation recording what your area of specialty is. And so in order to determine your overall clearance, they try to determine whether you have a history of gambling, drug addiction, or other suspicious things, or association with other political parties, or with foreigners, romantic entanglements with foreigners, and so on. They try to investigate your life and see if you have any of those things that would make you unfit. And so then you get documented approval for the subject to access certain objects. This is what you're asking, formal access approval. So you have to understand the rules and your consequences. And then you get approved to see certain types of information. And that's need to know. Most systems rely on least privilege. All right. And according to your book, a lot of these do not actually enforce the need to know. They expect you to enforce that by voluntarily not going to find out things outside your field of specialization. I would assume there's a bit more to it than that in the military, but I don't really know. I do not have a military security clearance, so I only know what I read in books about this stuff. I bet a lot of you do, and a lot of my friends do, but I don't have one. I never worked directly for the military. Now I work for a military contractor, but I work only on unclassified projects. All right, so you've got sensitive information, which means you have to protect it to some extent. It's be stored on media like backup tapes, and so your policies have to cover how you handle it, how you store it, and how long you retain it. So here we get to the administrative levels. There are owners. Owners are people who are responsible for maintaining something. So your senior management is owner of your whole business, and they create an information security program, and the owner is responsible for hiring staff, training staff, supervising them, making sure that things are done correctly, making sure the assets are taken care of, just like the owner of like a castle would have a bunch of staff cleaning and repairing it, or the owner of a house. They'd be responsible, even if they hire outside people to do the plumbing and the roofing, the owner's responsible for making sure that's all done correctly. So a data owner or an information owner owns some data, and they're then the person responsible for making sure that data is properly protected. They are not the one that actually does the work on the data. They are the supervisor. The person who does the work on the data is the custodian. So the custodian will be labeling tapes, destroying stuff that's time to destroy, making sure everything is locked in the right cupboard, and so on, and the owner is determining the rules and supervising and presumably checking to make sure that the custodian is in fact doing it correctly. So a system owner is responsible for physical computer, which would include the hardware and software updates and patches, and physical security, and so on. And they, again, are not expected to do that stuff. They are expected to supervise that stuff and have the custodian do that stuff and just make sure that the custodian is doing it right. So the custodian is the person that actually does the hands-on work, and they're supposed to be just complying with the instructions they get from the owner. As we mentioned, I think, in a different class, the 160 class, it is unfortunately a fairly common failing that the owners just leave the custodians to run without proper supervision. And then when things go wrong, they might try and blame the custodian, but that's not going to work because the owner is the person responsible. If the custodian does things wrong, the owner is responsible. Why didn't you hire the competent staff, supervise them, audit their work? Why did you let your custodian do the wrong thing? All right, so the custodian will be doing things like backups and antivirus and so on. But they won't be deciding what to do. They will be obeying instructions from the owner. And then there's users, of course, all the people at your company that are using laptop computers, answering the phone, doing any job at any level, sales or whatever, and they have to comply with a bunch of end user policies and so on. Things like not sharing accounts, not writing down passwords, and things like that. So they have a usually annual security awareness training, which makes sure they know what your company policies are and they know what the punishments are for breaking those policies and such. You got data controllers that manage the data. For example, human resources clearly has a bunch of confidential data. They have everybody's social security number and address and paycheck information and all that jazz. So that's sensitive data they have to own and control. And they have processors, which are often outsourced. Seems like everybody in the world prints their checks at ADP, Ross Perot's company. And so that means you have an outside contractor getting this sensitive data from your company and printing the checks for you and the tax forms and stuff. So you should, in general, not collect information you don't need. There was a time like 10 years ago when almost everything you buy would have a card to fill out for your warranty, shoes, or anything. And a lot of people learned it's better just not to collect all that data about the customers. It's just, unless you really are going to do something useful with it, it's just an unnecessary risk to have a bunch of extra data you don't need. So it's becoming more popular to just not collect a whole bunch of extra data. Yeah, how is the documented need? Yeah, we talked about that as much as I know. If any of you with military experience want to say something more about that documented need to know, I'd appreciate it, because I only know what I've seen in books. Some of you probably know how it really works. All right. Let's try a Kahoot. All right. All right. Well, maybe I got everybody. Yeah, somebody's finding out. Yep, someone told Maryam how to do it. And I see Maya, that's probably Maryam. Good? Good, okay. I'll give it a few seconds to see if anybody else is coming. All right, so what kind of data requires need to know in addition to clearance? Yep, the sensitive compartmented information, not just secret. Secret is clearance. But if you also need to know, that's called sensitive compartmented information. All right. So who actually puts on the security patches? Like, the Patch Tuesday Microsoft updates. Yep, the custodian. That's the person who does the work. Like that. Good. Who is the manager responsible for ensuring that the patches are applied? That's going to, well, now I would have thought the system owner. Let me go take a look at the slides and see. I think I got these from the slides, but that's a tough one. Okay, the system owner would be responsible for patches here. Why did I think the data owner? Yeah, I think that's not fair. I think that should have been the system owner. Yes, I think that should have been system owner. And I can't fix it now, but I am going to make a note to fix it for next time. Sorry about that. That's part of why these things are extra credit is there are some defects in these things. This is the Kahoot to a system owner. I think that should be system owner. And I will update it, but I can't change it now. We'll carry on with my glorious, unfair extra credit thing. That's why I don't give the real tests this way. This is not a very precise system. There's plenty of other ways, too. Data owner is correct, not the system owner? Well, now, see, that's what I wondered. Is data owner correct? It doesn't seem that way from here. Here's the data owner. Sensitivity labels and backup. It seems to me from these slides that it should be system owner. System owner is responsible for patches. So if you find some evidence for it being data owner is correct per ISACA, well, all right, I'm going to have to take a look at that one. What I'm going to have to do is remove one of those as options. So there's only one good option because I agreed both data owner and system owner have some truth, and that's a little too cruel. The real CISSP exam is full of even crueler questions than that. But anyway, I did not intend to subject you to that level of cruelty. Anyway, all right. So how about HR people? What category are they in? All right, and that's the data controller. All right, so, all right, I've got some winners, even though there are some defects in the process. Those look like real initials anyway. All right. All right. ISACA may not follow ISC squared rules. Well, that's another one. That's why I'm going to change it so not both of those options are there because that's too confusing. All right. Anyway, so memory and remnants. If you have data and you put it on a storage medium like a hard drive, or for that matter, even in RAM, then even when you're done using it, it may persist. But the main RAM forgets when you turn off the power, so that's not too important. The main issue is permanent storage, like hard drives, flash drives, and SSDs. Those have data for years, and you can lose them or have them stolen, and then somebody else gets the data. Now, there is memory. RAM is main memory, and there's cache memory, other chips and registers. These are all little locations that store a little bit of data in the computer. RAM stores quite a bit. And they all technically retain that data for a while, but when you turn off the power, it fades pretty fast. That RAM is volatile. Now, there's a cold boot attack where you freeze the RAM with cold air, And if you make it really cold, it can then hold the data for maybe 30 minutes. So if you get a computer that's still powered on, you can open the case, freeze the RAM, pull it out, and extract the data on another machine. And there are some attacks like that. One of them is called the cold boot attack, where you do that. So, but that's a little bit exotic. And the primary data remnants risk for most people is the long-term storage, like hard drives. Now, there's other RAM in there, static RAM, and dynamic RAM. Both of these are volatile and forget the data when you turn the power off. Then there's firmware, which is stored in ROM chips. This is stored using very low power, and it's powered by a battery. So remember this for a really long time, but you don't normally put anything confidential or sensitive on there. The only thing on there is typically things like which type of hard drive you have and how many hard drives and what type of keyboard you have, things like that, just so it can boot up, usually not anything like personally identifiable information. So there's programmable read-only memory. These are chips that will remember memory forever, and programmable logic devices, field programmable, erasable programmable, electrically erasable, and flash memory, which is what you have in the thumb drives. This is the most common form of this stuff, where you can store memory in a chip, store data in a chip, and it will be preserved even with no power. And these others typically do not contain personal information. They're usually used just for system information, although in principle they can have any kind of data. But some drives...
Sorry, could you say that again?
Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Yeah, I keep trying to find some way to turn off all the voice-activated garbage on my Apple devices, but it seems to be impossible. Anyway, so USB thumb drives are... remember any kind of data you put on them, and that often is confidential data you don't want to lose. There was an entertaining survey a few years ago where they surveyed top executives, and the average top executive owned 15 thumb drives and had owned 20 thumb drives and had lost 15 of them. So people lose them all the time. So it's really quite a data breach risk unless you've got them encrypted. And solid state drives, almost all modern computers have these instead of hard drives. And these things store data, and there is no way to erase them. This is a fun fact about them. They have a tendency for blocks to fail, and large blocks of data are written at a time, so they automatically replace bad blocks silently with extra blocks. If you buy a 100 gigabyte SSD, they actually give you some extra, like 102 or 103 gigabytes. And as it fails, a section will fail, and it will silently replace it with another section, and the part that failed is no longer addressable. And it's not just because it had an error and was considered unreliable doesn't mean the data is gone, and you can't erase it anymore. If you try to write zeros all over the whole thing, you are no longer able to map that section. So SSDs are essentially impossible to thoroughly erase. There is no forensic erase capability for them. Now, most of the time, the empty blocks are automatically erased anyway by a garbage collection to prepare them for storing more data, but the bad blocks are not. So there's some data remnants risk for SSDs, and also thumb drives. So if you want to clean an SSD, you can't just run something like Derek's boot and nuke that would just write zeros or random bytes all over the drive because it can't reach all the bytes. The only way to do it would be if the SSD controller has an internal erase command and you can trust it. You cannot, I think, destroy SSDs with magnets. Only magnetic hard drives, as far as I know. That's why typically people just physically destroy these things. There is another way to do it, though, which is what iPhones do. iPhones turn on encryption before you ever use it. It's always encrypted right from the start, and when you clean it, it just deletes the key. This is incredibly effective, and a forensic company tested this. They bought 100 iPhones off eBay, and they tried to recover data from them, and they were unable to recover data from any of them. So this is the right way to do it, and some Android phones do it too. But if you've already been using it, and then you turn on encryption, that's not good enough, because some data could already be in these bad blocks unencrypted. So that is one way to do it. And the other thing is just physically destroy the drive. Yep, crypto shred, exactly. But we have to make sure that all the sensitive data was encrypted. Yes, physically destroying it is by far your simplest procedure, and this is what most companies do. It is so much easier to do that and be sure it was done than to do these technological things, and then how do you really know if it worked or if it was really done on this whole pile of drives? It would be a whole lot simpler to just physically destroy them. All right. And so that's data destruction. Once you're done storing data of some kind, you have to get rid of the old data. Now, you could try overwriting a file, but deleting a file does not erase it. Even writing on top of it does not really erase it. There'll be little fragments of it left at the end of blocks and unused blocks. If you could write zeros over the entire volume and make sure you hit every sector, that would be fine. But as I said, this is not possible for SSDs because you do not have access to all the sectors. And by the way, I've had personal communication from Travis Goodspeed, who is an expert on this, although as far as I know, he's never written it up. He tells me magnetic hard drives above 500 gigabytes work the same way. There are extra sectors that you cannot reach. So any kind of forensic erasure is not really getting it all. So degaussing, as someone brought up, in principle, using a very strong magnet and really thoroughly going over all the surface would do it. This is used for tape sometimes. You just have to somehow make sure your magnet is strong enough. And again, if I was the management, I would say, how do I know that somebody really magnetically erased this whole pile of drives? How do I know they didn't skip a couple? It would be a whole lot simpler to just physically destroy them. Then I can really make sure that happened. Anyway, so then physically destruction, by far the most simple thing. Just people get wood chippers, they drill holes, there's various techniques. Just physically break the thing. All right, so let's try another Kahoot. 125 2B, here we go. Not wood chippers, they use log splitters. That's what they use, to just smash the thing in half. All right, I think we got everybody. All right, so which component retains data longer when cooled? By the way, this is a classic CISSP question. If you wanted to get technical, all these probably retain data longer than when cooled, but this is the case where it actually matters, where you're actually going to have data of a type that matters, of a quantity that matters, and being preserved for a length of time that matters. So this is the best of the available options, even if it's not true that one is 100% right and the others are all 100% wrong. That's the CISSP philosophy. You have to choose the best of the available options, given whatever information they gave you. Anyway. All right, so which one can only be written once? Yeah, that's PROM. That's the original PROM. You can only program it once, and then it remembers forever, but you cannot erase it. If you want to change anything, you have to throw it away and replace it with another chip. All right, which one has garbage collection? The SSDs do. Remember, I gave a talk at DEF CON. It was fun. I found a brand of SSD that would take like 15 seconds to erase it so you could actually watch the data and then watch it vanish, which is pretty fun. I think that was Corsair had that property. Anyway, that's garbage collection on SSDs. When you're not doing anything else, it's in the background finding the unused stuff and clearing it so it's ready to store more data on later. All right, so you're starting an unencrypted SSD. How do you clean it? Physical destruction is the only way. Shredding does not refer to physical destruction. Shredding is the term for electronic overriding with things like random bytes. Sounds like physical destruction, but that's what they call it. Data shredding is overwriting data with zeros or random stuff. Physical destruction is the only way to be sure you get it all. All right. All right. Might be close enough to real name for my grader to figure it out. All right, that's a real name for sure. All right. So, a little bit more to do. Like I thought, we're going to fit it all in the first hour tonight. Get a little bit shorter lecture than usual. All right. So, data security controls. Certification means just like you could get certified like a CISSP certificate, that means you meet certain requirements. You pass a certain test. Accreditation is when the owner accepts that this will do. So, I mean, you might be certified with like Security Plus, but the owner says that's not good enough. I want another one. So even though you technically have a certification, you have not satisfied the requirements of the owner. That's accreditation, when they declare that whatever you have is good enough. So there's a lot of standards. PCI DSS is for people that take credit cards. Octave is the Carnegie Mellon system, standard for security. And the ISO 27000 we mentioned is an international standard that costs usually millions of dollars and takes years to set up, and your whole company has to prove that you set policies, you implement them, you use controls to enforce them, you have assessments to determine whether people are complying and whether the compliance is achieving your goals, and then you have improvements that go back up and revise the policies, and you have a blizzard of paper flying around with reports and audits and everything proving that all these things have happened. And then you can be trusted to be hired by like a major military and trusted to make their stuff because you have all these controls in place and documentation in place to prove that it's all being done according to appropriate security standards. COBIT is one from ISACA, a governance model, just making sure that you are watching that security is being done, implemented at your company, and measuring it and preparing reports. ITIL is another one for IT service management. So, and you apply any of these to your company, it is not as simple as just making your company identical to every other company that has complied. Every business is different. So first you have scoping. Certain parts of the standard may not apply to you for various reasons. For example, if you're not using wireless, then whatever the rules are about wireless, that doesn't matter. And then there's tailoring, where you customize the standard. I was surprised. One of my students took on the job at a major company of bringing them up to PCI compliance. And he was sort of horrified because he wanted to make sure that they 100% did everything. But the fact is, to apply PCI compliance, you do not actually have to live up to all the standards. You either have to obey the rule or you have to write a business case explaining why you don't need to obey the rule because you have some other control or something about your business process. And, the owner said, just get it done fast. I got a customer I want to bring in. And he kept saying, no, I want to do it right. This is the standard push. He said, oh, just the ones that are too hard, just make an excuse in the business case. And that's what happens. It's not as simple as you just do what you should do and it's over. It reminds me of what I was told about paying your taxes in Italy. You think the American tax code is horrible. the Italian tax code is such a mess that what happens is you have your lawyer go out with the government's lawyer and they go have drinks and they make a deal. Because nobody can figure out what the right taxes are. You just sort of negotiate a compromise. Anyway, yeah. So tailoring is this customizing it for your organization, where you might have compensating controls or something about your business that means you cannot exactly do what's required. There's a guy I know in the IPv6 community who made himself really unpopular because he would go to conferences and he would loudly call out, if you're implementing IP version 6, what about your network address translation? They'd all shut up, because the official government requirement was that every government agency must have address translation. But when you correctly deploy IP version 6, it does not use network address translation. So technically, it was impossible to be compliant with the government standards and using IP version 6. And their answer was, shut up, don't talk about that. We're all doing it, but we don't want to have to admit it in public. Anyway, it's often the case that the rules, you cannot really 100% obey the rules. All right, so then you got data controls. For example, if you have PCI control, you will have to have, you protect data in motion and protect data in rest. They all require this one way or another. So drive and tape is data at rest, data that's stored. So the idea here is, what if somebody physically steals the tape? Then, if it was encrypted, that's protecting your data at rest. I'm still kind of confused about the difference between scoping and tailoring. Oh, well, scoping is something is out of scope if you do not even have that risk. This is the same thing as the risk treatment called avoidance, where, for example, like Facebook is finding it too burdensome to meet the privacy controls of Europe, so they're going to just stop letting Europeans use Facebook. Now that's scoping. Let's say we don't have to obey European privacy regulations anymore because we no longer have any European customers. That's scoping. Tailoring is where you have a control and they require that you say have a firewall, but you have something else instead of a firewall, and then you make an argument that our other thing is as good as a firewall. That's tailoring. Yeah, it's quite different. Tailoring is where you admit this rule would apply to me, but you have an argument about how you're going to do something else instead of exactly doing what they expected you to do. Yeah, that's right, like mitigating controls and such. Yeah. Good. Very good point. And yeah, bring up the questions. Absolutely. All right, so if you have data at rest stored on something and it's not protected, then if somebody steals the physical device it's stored on, they've got your data. But if you encrypt it, then this is covered, for example, laptops. If people take laptops on airplanes and they lose them, which happens all the time, then if that hard drive was encrypted with something like BitLocker, your company does not have to report a breach. That is considered safe. That's data protected at rest. So even though somebody stole the laptop and you lost the physical cost of the laptop, you do not have to regard yourself as having had a data breach, because the encryption means that the crook couldn't get the data. That's the idea. So any kind of mobile devices should all be encrypted. All right. So your media storage, you have to have backup, and you have to store your backups off-site, because what if the whole building burns down? So the best thing, beginning companies often have like amateurs just driving it home and putting it at home, but that's not a formal process that's good enough for serious compliance with any of these standards. What you have to do is have a company like Iron Mountain that will pick it up and stick it in an armored truck and drive it and store it in a locked, safe location so you know where it is. And again, it would be a good idea if those backup tapes are encrypted also. All right. And protecting data in motion means when your data is going over a network, you don't just send it plain, you encrypt it. The original Snowden revelations from, I think, 2013 revealed that the NSA was hacking Yahoo and many other American companies because typical American companies at that time did not encrypt data in transit on their own network. They would encrypt it when it left their network, but within the network, it was just going in plain text. So all the NSA had to do was to compromise your internal network with software or hardware and get your internal traffic, and then they could see everything you were doing. And I and other sort of idealistic security people have been saying for years, you ought to be using HTTPS even inside your LAN, but it was still not a common practice. And I think now it is. A whole bunch of security improved after Snowden revelations because it kind of exposed a whole lot of practices that were being exploited by the NSA, and everybody had to pretty much knock it off. So You ought to be having encrypted transmissions even on your local network, and that fits with the modern recommendation of a zero trust policy, where you do not have a perimeter and you say, I trust all the machines inside this perimeter. I say you can't do that. Some of those machines could have malware. Some of your employees could have brought in an infected device from home. So you have to continue to have layers of security even inside your network. And encrypting everything is one of those reasonable measures to protect data even inside your network. So 2C is here. All right. See if I made any more mistakes in these things. All right. I guess we got everybody that's coming. Okay, which one is the international standard? That's it. ISO stands for International Organization for Standardization, I think in some other language, which is why the letters are out of order. That's the international one. All right, which one comes from ISACA? Okay, that's COBIT. Good. Okay, what process determines what parts of a standard you will use? That's scoping. All right. All right. And what do you have to do after a breach? You have to notify government agencies, customers, vendors, employees, various people. And you've got to, of course, involve your legal department and your public relations department in that process. All right. All right, Reezy's won twice. I hope my grader can figure out the right person. And Char's won twice. Good. And Mamet has run twice. Good. All right. So I'll stop this one.